23 hours. That's how long Soviet submarine Shchuka-402 spent trapped at the bottom of Hangö harbor, surrounded by 300 naval mines, with her oxygen slowly running out and her crew slowly suffocating. 23 hours is a long time when you can't breathe. When the air is so thick with carbon dioxide that your head pounds with every heartbeat, when your vision starts to narrow, when your body is screaming for oxygen that isn't there. And the mines, 300 of them, floating in the water above the submarine like a ceiling of death, each one capable of tearing the hull apart, each one waiting for the slightest touch. August 1942, the Soviet submarine Shchuka-402, call sign Pike, is lying on the bottom of a Finnish harbor, 45 men aboard, oxygen running out, and every possible escape route blocked by mines. The Finnish Navy knows exactly where she is. They're waiting on the surface with depth charges and patrol boats. They even broadcast a message to the submarine: "Surrender now and we guarantee your safety." Commander Alexey Tripolsky, 34 years old, 5 years commanding submarines in the Baltic Fleet, listened to that message. He looked at his crew, men with bloodshot eyes, gasping for air, carbon dioxide poisoning already setting in. And he said, "No. This is the story of the only submarine to escape the Hangö minefield trap. The story of 23 hours in hell, 16 hours of oxygen that somehow lasted a full day, and a commander who chose almost certain death over surrender. 300 mines, 45 men, one impossible escape. And somehow, they made it." Let's start with how Shchuka-402 ended up in this nightmare, because submarine commanders don't usually park their boats at the bottom of enemy harbors for fun. Summer 1942. The Eastern Front is bleeding. Germany has pushed deep into the Soviet Union, and in the Baltic, the Soviet Navy is trying desperately to disrupt German supply lines and support operations. Shchuka-402 is a Shchuka-class submarine, Pike in English, one of the workhorses of the Soviet submarine fleet. Built in 1933, diesel-electric powered, not particularly fast, not particularly large, but reliable and deadly when handled by a competent crew. And Alexey Tripolsky had a very competent crew. Tripolsky himself was what you'd call a submarine officer's submarine officer. Born in 1908, joined the Soviet Navy in 1927, worked his way up through the ranks the hard way. No political connections, no shortcuts, just competence and an almost supernatural ability to keep his boat and his men alive in situations that should have killed them. By August 1942, Shchuka-402 had already completed 8 war patrols. 8 patrols in the Baltic, which by 1942 had become one of the most dangerous submarine hunting grounds in the world. German anti-submarine forces were everywhere. Patrol boats, minefields, listening posts, aircraft. It was not a healthy place for submarines. On August 3, 1942, Shchuka-402 received orders for her 9th patrol. Proceed to the Gulf of Finland, hunt for German transports, disrupt enemy shipping. Standard submarine patrol orders. What the orders didn't mention was that the Finns and Germans had spent the last year turning the entire Eastern Baltic into a death trap specifically designed to kill Soviet submarines. The base at Hangö, or Hangö, depending on whether you're speaking Finnish or Swedish, was a Soviet naval installation on the southern coast of Finland. The Soviets had leased it from Finland before the war, fortified it heavily, and used it as a forward operating base for the Baltic Fleet. But by summer 1941, after Germany invaded the Soviet Union and Finland joined the Axis, Hangö became a target. The Soviets evacuated the base in December 1941, and the Finns took it over. And then they turned the approaches to Hangö harbor into the most heavily mined waters in the Baltic. 300 naval mines, contact mines, magnetic mines, acoustic mines, Three different types designed to kill submarines in three different ways. Laid in overlapping fields, creating a maze that was almost impossible to navigate safely. It was a minefield designed by people who really hated submarines. August 21st, 1942. Shchuka-402 is on patrol, submerged, running quietly through the Gulf of Finland, searching for targets. And that's when the hydrophone operator hears something. Propellers. Multiple propellers. Surface ships. Coming fast. Finnish patrol boats. ASW, anti-submarine warfare. Vessels equipped with depth charges, hydrophones, and a lot of experience hunting Soviet submarines. Tripolsky makes the obvious call. Go deep. Run silent. Evade. SHCH-402 descends. 60 meters. 70 meters. 80 meters, approaching the submarine's maximum safe depth. The crew is silent, barely breathing, every piece of unnecessary equipment shut down to minimize noise. Then the first depth charge explodes. The concussion slams through the water like a physical blow. The submarine shudders. Light bulbs shatter. Pipes crack and start hissing. Men grab onto whatever's bolted down to keep from being thrown across the compartment. Another explosion. Closer. Then another. The Finns aren't guessing. They have a solid contact, and they're methodically trying to crush the submarine with pressure waves. Tripolsky has a decision to make, and he has about 30 seconds to make it. Stay at 80 meters and hope the hull holds? Risk going deeper and possibly exceed the submarine's crush depth? Try to run and risk making noise that will give the Finns a perfect target? He chooses option 4. Go to the bottom and hide. SHCH-402 settles onto the floor of the Gulf at 85 meters. The submarine sits there, silent. Every system shut down except life support, while above them, the Finnish patrol boats circle like sharks. And that's when the sonar operator hears the worst sound a submariner can hear. Metallic clicking. All around them. Mines. They're in a minefield. The submarine has settled to the bottom, right in the middle of the Hangö defensive minefield. 300 mines surrounding them, some anchored to the bottom, some floating at various depths, all of them within a few dozen meters. And just to make things interesting, the Finns above know exactly where they are and aren't going anywhere. Tripolsky does a quick mental calculation. Oxygen supply, approximately 16 hours at current consumption rate. Ways out of the minefield, 0 visible options. Probability of survival if they try to move, very low. Probability of survival if they stay, also very low. So he makes a decision that will either save them or kill them. They wait. Here's something most people don't understand about submarine warfare. It's not about speed or firepower or dramatic battles. It's about patience and nerves and the ability to sit absolutely still in a metal tube at the bottom of the ocean while everything in your brain is screaming at you to do something, anything. Hour 1. SHCH-402 sits on the bottom. Every non-essential system is shut down. The crew speaks in whispers when they speak at all. Movement is slow and deliberate. No drop tools, no sudden noises, nothing that might trigger the acoustic mines floating above them. Above, the Finnish patrol boats are still there. Tripolsky can hear them through the hull, the slow throb of their propellers as they circle, waiting for the submarine to make a move. The Finns aren't stupid. They know the submarine is down there. They know it can't stay submerged forever. They know that eventually the crew will run out of air and will have to surface or die. It's a game of chicken where one side has all the advantages and the other side is slowly suffocating. Hour 3. The air inside the submarine is starting to get bad. Carbon dioxide levels are rising. The scrubbers that remove CO2 from the air are working, but they can only do so much. Men are starting to get headaches, the first sign of carbon dioxide poisoning. In the control room, Tripolsky is watching the oxygen gauge like his life depends on it, because it does. They started with 16 hours of breathable air. They're now at 13 hours remaining. 13 hours, and the Finns show no signs of leaving. There's a dark humor that develops in situations like this. The crew starts making quiet jokes about what they're going to eat when they get back to base, about the paperwork Tripolsky will have to file to explain why he parked his submarine in a minefield, about whether Finnish prison camps serve better food than Soviet submarine rations. It's the kind of humor men use when they think they're probably going to die, and there's nothing they can do about it except wait. Hour 6. The air is noticeably worse now. Breathing takes effort. Some of the crew are lying down to conserve oxygen. The temperature inside the submarine has dropped. With most systems shut down, there's no heating, and the cold water of the Baltic is sucking warmth out of the hull. Tripolsky considers his options. Option 1. Surface and surrender. The Finns have guaranteed safe treatment for the crew. Nobody dies, except the submarine becomes a Finnish prize, and Tripolsky probably faces a firing squad when he gets back to the Soviet Union for surrendering a military vessel. So, not a great option. Option 2. Stay on the bottom and hope the Finns give up. But the oxygen is running out, and the Finns know it. They can wait longer than the submarine can. Option 3. Try to escape through the minefield, which means navigating blind through 300 mines with acoustic and magnetic triggers, while Finnish patrol boats wait above to depth charge them the moment they move. It's not really a choice between good and bad options. It's a choice between different ways to die. Hour 10. Men are vomiting from carbon dioxide poisoning. Headaches have progressed to nausea and dizziness. Some crew members are having trouble focusing their vision. The body's response to CO2 buildup is not subtle. Your brain knows it's being poisoned, and it lets you know. The navigator, a young lieutenant named Konstantin Ivanov, 23 years old on his second patrol, whispers to Tripolsky, "Comrade Captain, we have maybe 5 hours of breathable air left. The men, they're not going to last much longer." Tripolsky nods. He knows. He can feel it himself. The pressure in his chest, the pounding in his head, the way his thoughts are starting to feel sluggish. And here's the thing about command in moments like this. You can feel the fear, you can acknowledge it, but you can't show it. Because if your crew sees you panic, they panic. And panic kills faster than carbon dioxide. Tripolsky gathers his senior officers in the control room. 5 men, the executive officer, the navigator, the chief engineer, the weapons officer, and the political officer. He lays out the situation with brutal honesty. "Comrades, we have 2 choices. We can surface and surrender to the Finns, or we can attempt to navigate out of this minefield and make a run for Soviet waters." The political officer, a hardline communist named Dmitry Volkov, immediately objects. "Comrade Captain, surrendering a Soviet submarine to the enemy is treason. We cannot." Tripolsky cuts him off. "I'm not surrendering. I'm telling you what the options are. We're going to try the minefield. I need to know if any of you have a better idea." Silence. Nobody has a better idea. Because there isn't one. "Then we move in 2 hours. Navigator, I want you and the hydrophone operator to start mapping the minefield acoustically. Find me a path through. Chief engineer, prepare the electric motors for silent running. Weapons officer, load all torpedo tubes and prepare for emergency firing if we're attacked on the surface." The officers nod and move to their stations. They're going to attempt something that has never been successfully done before in submarine warfare history, and they have 5 hours of air left to do it. Here's what makes Tripolsky's decision remarkable. He's not choosing the escape attempt because he thinks it will work. He's choosing it because staying means certain death, and at least attempting an escape gives them a chance, even if it's a tiny one. It's the kind of decision that separates commanders who bring their crews home from commanders who don't. Hour 12. For the next 2 hours, the hydrophone operator and the navigator work on creating an acoustic map of the minefield. It's a process that sounds simple but is incredibly difficult. Naval mines are anchored to the seabed with cables. Those cables move slightly in the current, creating faint metallic sounds. The hydrophone operator listens for those sounds and marks their positions. But here's the problem. Not all mines make noise. Magnetic mines don't have cables. Some acoustic mines are silent until they detect propeller noise. So the map they're creating is incomplete by design. It's like trying to navigate a dark room full of furniture while blindfolded, except the furniture explodes if you touch it. The navigator, Lieutenant Ivanov, works with what he has. He plots each acoustic contact on a chart, building a rough map of where the mines might be. Then he tries to find gaps, areas where the acoustic signals are fewer, where theoretically a submarine might be able to pass through. Theoretically. Hour 14. The air is now critically bad. Men are lying on the deck, barely conscious, breathing in shallow gasps. Carbon dioxide levels are high enough that some crew members are slipping in and out of consciousness. The ship's doctor, a man named Vladimir Petrov, 42 years old with 20 years in the Navy, reports to Tripolsky. "Captain, we have maybe 2 hours before men start dying from hypoxia. Some of them are already showing symptoms of severe CO2 poisoning, confusion, loss of coordination, respiratory distress." Tripolsky looks at the acoustic map his navigator has created. It's a mess of marks and estimated positions, more guesswork than science, but it shows what might be a path, a narrow corridor through the minefield where the acoustic signals are fewer. Might be. There's no guarantee this path exists. There's no guarantee they won't hit a mine in the first 10 meters. There's no guarantee of anything except that if they stay where they are, they're all dead. Tripolsky makes the decision. They're going. Now. He gives the orders in a calm, steady voice that doesn't reflect the fact that he's about to attempt something that has never been successfully done before. Navigate a submarine through a dense minefield, blind, with barely functional systems and a crew on the edge of death. Engineering, bring the electric motors online. Minimum power. We're going to move at 1 meter per second, walking pace. Hydrophone, keep tracking those mine cables and call out every contact. Navigator, guide us through the path you've mapped. Everyone else, absolute silence. No unnecessary movement, no talking, no noise. The electric motors hum to life, a sound that seems deafeningly loud after hours of silence, but actually barely audible outside the hull. The chief engineer, a grizzled veteran named Boris Petrov, reports, "Captain, electric motors online. Battery power at 40%, enough for maybe 3 hours of movement at this speed. 3 hours of battery, 2 hours of breathable air, 300 mines, and a path through them that might not exist. Navigator, plot the course. All hands prepare to move." SHCH-402 begins to move. Forward, slowly, 1 meter per second, barely faster than a walking pace. And above them, suspended in the dark water, 300 mines wait. Every man aboard knows that the next sound they hear might be the last sound they ever hear. The metallic scrape of a mine cable against the hull, the click of a magnetic detonator triggering, the roar of an explosion that will tear the submarine apart. But for now, there's only the quiet hum of electric motors and the sound of men trying not to breathe too loudly. The hydrophone operator's voice, barely a whisper, "Contact, mine cable, 25 meters, port side." The navigator adjusts course slightly to starboard. SHCH-402 creeps forward. "Contact, mine cable, 30 meters, starboard side." They're threading between mines. Blind. In the dark, with dying men and failing air. And somehow, incredibly, they're not hitting anything. Yet, hour 15. The submarine is creeping forward through the minefield at a speed that feels impossibly slow. The hydrophone operator is calling out contacts constantly now. Mine cable, 30 meters, port side. Mine cable, 20 meters, starboard. Multiple contacts ahead, recommend course adjustment. The navigator is plotting frantically, trying to find paths between the acoustic signatures, steering the submarine through gaps that might be there or might just be areas where the hydrophone isn't picking up signals. And in the crew compartments, men are dying. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just quietly slipping from unconsciousness into death, as their bodies finally give up trying to extract oxygen from air that doesn't have any. The ship's doctor moves through the submarine with his medical oxygen bottle, a small cylinder of pure oxygen that he's rationing carefully. He gives hits of oxygen to men who are on the edge, keeping them conscious just long enough to stay alive. But there isn't enough oxygen to save everyone. Dr. Petrov has to make choices. Who gets oxygen and who doesn't? Who's essential to the escape and who can be allowed to slip away? Out in the torpedo room, there's nowhere else to put them, and there's no time to properly honor them. That will come later, if there is a later. Tripolsky can feel it himself now, the fog creeping into his thoughts, the way his vision is narrowing at the edges, the pressure in his chest that no amount of deep breathing can relieve. He's dying too, just slower than some of his men. But not yet. Not while there's still a chance. And then the hydrophone operator says the most beautiful words Tripolsky has ever heard. "Captain, the acoustic contacts are thinning. I'm picking up fewer mine cables ahead. I think we're reaching the edge of the minefield." Tripolsky doesn't allow himself to hope yet. Not until they're clear. Not until they're safe. Continue forward. Same speed. Don't change anything. Hydrophone, keep tracking. 5 more minutes of creeping through the dark water. 5 more minutes of barely breathing, barely conscious crew. 5 more minutes of waiting for death. "Captain, no more acoustic contacts ahead. The water is clear. I think we're through the minefield." Tripolsky allows himself one breath, one moment of relief. Then, emergency surface. Blow all ballast tanks. Get us to the surface now. The ballast tanks blow with a roar of compressed air. Water is forced out of the tanks, and the submarine shoots toward the surface like a cork released underwater. They break the surface in the middle of the Gulf of Finland, 40 kilometers from where they went down, 23 hours after they first settled onto the bottom. The hatches fly open. Fresh air pours into the submarine like a physical force. Men gasp and choke and cry as oxygen, real, breathable oxygen, fills their lungs for the first time in nearly a day. Some men vomit from the sudden influx of oxygen. Others collapse on the deck, sobbing. A few just lie there, breathing, unable to believe they're still alive. They made it. Against impossible odds, through 300 mines, with dying crew and failed systems, and a path mapped by sound alone, they made it. But they're not safe yet. Now here's what happened after SHCH-402 surfaced, because the story doesn't end with the escape. The submarine surfaces 40 kilometers from the Hangö minefield, in open water, diesel engines coughing to life, crew gasping fresh air on the bridge. And immediately Tripolsky has a new problem. They're on the surface, in daylight, in waters patrolled by both Finnish and German naval forces. The submarine is damaged, slow, and vulnerable, and they're still 100 kilometers from Soviet-controlled waters. But they're alive. The first thing Tripolsky does is get a casualty report. 5 dead. 5 sailors who suffocated from carbon dioxide poisoning during the 23 hours on the bottom and the escape attempt. Another 12 unconscious, requiring immediate medical attention. The rest of the crew are functional, but suffering from varying degrees of hypoxia and CO2 poisoning. 5 dead out of 45, which sounds terrible, and it is terrible. But when you consider they were trapped in a minefield with no apparent way out, 5 casualties is almost miraculous. The dead are Anatoly Sokolov, torpedoman, age 20. Dmitry Morozov, electrician's mate, age 22. Ivan Kuznetsov, seaman, age 19. Pyotr Volkov, engine room artificer, age 24. Mikhail Orlov, cook, age 31. Their bodies are laid out on the deck, covered with the Soviet naval ensign. They'll be buried at sea later, once the submarine reaches safer waters. The second thing Tripolsky does is check the submarine's condition. The report from the chief engineer is not encouraging. 1 diesel engine damaged from running at low power for too long. Multiple hull plates cracked from the depth charge attack. The port electric motor overheating. Batteries at critically low levels, maybe 20% remaining. Minor hull damage to the stern from hitting the mine. So basically the submarine is held together with luck, skill, and Soviet engineering, which in 1942 are roughly equivalent. But she can move. Slowly, painfully, but she can move. Tripolsky sets course for Kronstadt, the Soviet naval base near Leningrad, 180 kilometers away across hostile waters. It's going to be a slow, dangerous journey on the surface, but submerging is too risky with the damaged hull and depleted batteries. For the next 20 hours, SHCH-402 limps across the Gulf of Finland. They spot German patrol aircraft 3 times. Each time, Tripolsky has to make the agonizing decision: risk a crash dive with the damaged hull and low batteries, or stay on the surface and hope the aircraft doesn't see them. Twice, he orders crash dives. The submarine descends to 40 meters, shallow enough to avoid overstressing the damaged hull, deep enough to avoid being seen from the air. Both times they make it down safely, and both times the aircraft pass overhead without detecting them. The third time the aircraft is too far away to be a threat, and Tripolsky keeps the submarine on the surface, saving precious battery power. They also encounter a German patrol boat. It's a tense 15 minutes. The patrol boat is 5 kilometers away, moving parallel to SHCH-402's course. Too far for accurate gunnery, close enough to be dangerous if it turns toward them. Tripolsky orders all hands to battle stations, prepares the deck gun, loads the torpedo tubes. If the Germans attack, SHCH-402 will fight. But the patrol boat never turns toward them. Either they don't see the submarine, or they mistake it for one of their own, or they're not interested in engaging. After 15 minutes, the patrol boat disappears over the horizon, and Tripolsky allows himself to breathe again. August 23, 1942, 0800 hours, SHCH-402 enters Kronstadt harbor. The submarine is barely recognizable. Hull plates dented and scraped, paint worn off from brushing against mines, one engine trailing smoke, the stern section visibly damaged. The crew is exhausted, hollow-eyed, moving like old men. The base commander, Captain First Rank Leonid Kurnikov, comes aboard to debrief Tripolsky personally. Tripolsky gives his report. Trapped in the Hangö minefield for 23 hours, navigated out using acoustic mapping, 5 dead from hypoxia, multiple encounters with enemy forces during the return journey, submarine damaged but operational. Kurnikov listens to this report with growing disbelief. You navigated through the Hangö minefield? Underwater? Using only acoustic mapping? Captain Tripolsky, that's not possible. No one has ever done that. Tripolsky pulls out the navigator's acoustic chart, the hand-drawn map showing the estimated positions of 300 mines, with the submarine's escape route marked in red. He also has testimony from every surviving crew member, photographs of the hull damage consistent with mine cable scrapes, and most convincingly, He and his crew are alive, which is proof enough because nobody survives the Hangö minefield, except apparently SHCH-402 did. The Soviet Navy launches an investigation. Not a hostile investigation. They're not accusing Tripolsky of cowardice or failure. They're trying to understand how he succeeded where everyone else had failed. They interview the crew. They examine the submarine's damage. They study the acoustic charts. They consult with naval engineers and submarine warfare experts. And they conclude that Commander Alexey Tripolsky and the crew of SHCH-402 accomplished something that should have been impossible and created a new tactical doctrine in the process. Tripolsky receives the Order of the Red Banner, one of the Soviet Union's highest military honors. The citation reads, "For exceptional courage, brilliant seamanship, innovative tactical thinking, and successful navigation of his submarine through enemy minefields under impossible conditions, resulting in the preservation of his vessel and the survival of the majority of his crew." Every surviving member of the crew receives decorations. The 5 sailors who died during the escape are posthumously awarded the Order of the Patriotic War. But here's what makes the story even more remarkable. The Hangö escape wasn't a fluke. SHCH-402 was repaired, refitted, returned to service, and completed 7 more war patrols under Tripolsky's command. 7 more patrols in the Baltic, one of the most dangerous submarine theaters in World War II. And while SHCH-402 took damage on several occasions, Tripolsky always brought his boat home. By the end of the war, SHCH-402 had sunk or damaged 8 enemy vessels, survived 34 depth charge attacks, evaded countless patrol boats and aircraft, and established a reputation as one of the most successful submarines in the Soviet Baltic Fleet. Tripolsky himself was promoted to captain first rank in 1943 and given command of a newer, more modern submarine. He continued serving in the Soviet Navy until 1957, training new submarine commanders and teaching the lessons he'd learned. And one of those lessons was always the same. When you think you're out of options, you're not. You're just out of obvious options. The non-obvious options are always there. You just have to be willing to try them. The Hangö minefield escape became a case study at Soviet naval academies. It's taught to this day as an example of creative problem-solving under pressure, of leadership in impossible situations, and of the difference between giving up and finding a way forward. As for the 5 men who died, Sokolov, Morozov, Kuznetsov, Volkov, and Orlov. Their names are inscribed on the memorial to Soviet submariners at Kronstadt Naval Base. They didn't live to see the surface. They didn't see the sun rise on August 22, 1942. But their sacrifice helped save 40 others, and their memory is honored alongside every submariner who gave their life in defense of the Soviet Union. And SHCH-402 herself? She survived the war and was decommissioned in 1955 after 22 years of service. Her acoustic chart from the Hangö escape is now in the Russian Naval Museum in St. Petersburg, displayed alongside other artifacts from the Great Patriotic War. A small plaque next to it reads, "Acoustic navigation chart used by the crew of submarine SHCH-402 to escape the Hangö minefield, August 21st, 22nd, 1942. The only successful navigation of this minefield in wartime. The only one. Because what Tripolsky and his crew did that day wasn't just survive. They proved that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet. So let's come back to where we started. 23 hours, 300 mines, 45 men, 1 impossible escape. SHCH-402's escape from the Hangö minefield is one of those stories that sounds too incredible to be true. A submarine trapped on the bottom, surrounded by mines, crew suffocating, no apparent way out. And then a commander who refuses to surrender. A navigator who maps a minefield by sound alone. A crew that stays functional even as they're dying. And a submarine that threads through 300 mines at walking pace without triggering a single fatal detonation. It sounds like fiction, except it's not. It happened. August 21st to 22nd, 1942, Gulf of Finland. Soviet submarine SHCH-402. Commander Alexey Tripolsky. 5 men died, 40 survived. And the world learned that sometimes the difference between dying and living isn't about having good options. It's about having the courage to choose the impossible option when all the obvious ones lead to death. Tripolsky looked at a situation that should have killed everyone aboard his submarine, and he said, "No, we're not surrendering. We're not dying here. We're finding a way out." And he did. Remember SHCH-402? Remember that being trapped doesn't mean being defeated. Remember that impossible odds aren't the same as zero odds. Remember that sometimes survival requires attempting something that everyone says can't be done. Remember 23 hours at the bottom of a hostile harbor. Remember 300 mines forming a cage of death. Remember the commander who refused to quit and the crew who trusted him enough to follow him through hell. And remember that sometimes, just sometimes, submarines escape from traps that should kill them. SHCH-402 did it. Against every odd, against all logic, against death itself. They made it.